So, hey, it was great having our panel this afternoon, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about what your key takeaways were and what mine were, because I thought it was great energy, and people were really, really excited and interested to talk about DE&I. And just to preface, I mean, what we threw out to the audience was that in the keynote from Shane Snow earlier yesterday, he really said that there's such an importance for organizations to have diverse perspectives, that it really impacts the bottom line and organizational performance. But we know from our work that most organizations are not moving the needle forward in terms of meeting their own internal diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. So our panel was really trying to have that conversation that's often a difficult conversation and break that organizational silence and really talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how we at our organizations can kind of move the needle forward. So I had 3 big takeaways, and I'm going to share them with you, and I want to know if you think yes or no. So the first one really was that chief learning officers and executive leaders really need to be more involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, that diversity, equity, and inclusion should not be tangential or on the sidebar. It should be central to an organization's strategy and certainly to a CLO's strategy. So that was one. The other one, we really talked a little bit about, this is not checking the box, it's really culture change, and to advance culture change, you have to have a very explicit learning and development strategy around DE&I. So that was the second one. And then the third one, really going back to Shane Snow again, because he was so great, is that whole notion of leaders as conductors in this age, and that modern leaders really need to learn new skills to conduct their quote-unquote orchestras. And the big takeaway I had today was that the skills around diversity, equity, and inclusion competence are skills that can be learned, just like math, just like a new language. And we really need to demystify DE&I a little bit and say it really comes down to skill building. And if we can build skills around leadership and table stakes and things like that, we can do it with DE&I. What did you think?
I agree. I think what's really important is getting folks to feel comfortable with that. And I think there's a little, you said demystify, and I feel like that's kind of what happens in this space is people get a little perplexed or a little thrown off. And so how do we help folks realize that just like other skills that you're hungry for, that you're excited to build and add more to your box, this too is an area that you want to get better adjusted around and better informed and engaged. And the reality is, unlike maybe even a technical skill, it has to be much more sort of innate, right? You have to feel it, and people will respond to the way that you feel and the way that you act, right? So I think that's another layer that might sort of be a little different for folks. I'd love to build competencies around inclusive leadership skills and sort of how do you demonstrate that and find individuals who are doing a great job, and then others around them can begin to emulate and feel comfortable as colleagues and or begin to sort of also accept those skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's up for our leaders to really connect those dots, right? And really create that plan, right? I think and be willing to adjust that plan. We've talked about that as well, right? It's like, let's set out some guidelines, create a plan, be willing to adjust that plan, and then, connect the dots to good business, right? So, because at the end of the day, DE&I is good business. And that's what we need our employees and our organizations to realize, that by embracing that type of initiative, you're going toward a more engaged workforce. You're going toward improved business results. You're going toward talent attraction, being a desired workplace, being a desired business partner, being a desired corporate citizen. Right? And so I think as you start to connect those dots and have a long view of it too, right? I mean, sometimes we're too much about the quick hits. And so if we can have a long view, connect those dots, lay out the plan, then we'll get the buy-in.
Yeah, that's great. And if we can think about, some of the overarching questions that we asked and some of the answers that we gave and some of the answers that actually our audience gave. Our audience was really engaged. I'd love to run through those. So one of the big questions was, what is most critical for success, for a successful D&I effort. If you could like hit maybe 3 or 4 highlighted ones that we can share, what would those be? Like, absolutely, if you do nothing else to advance D&I at your organization, you must do these.
I think you have to start by really getting folks to feel genuinely curious about this work, right? So, as much as I think people are often driven by it makes business sense, it also is the right thing to do. And if you can get really centered around that, I think that helps drive some of those other activities and behaviors, and figure out that, I think the whole recognition of even the destination, it's not clear always, right? And the destination continues to move, and that's okay. We're going on a journey. The journey's a little, in moments, it might be fuzzy or hazy, and we're going to get there.
Yep.
And if we can just realize that we'll sort of figure the best that we can, we'll be our most well-intentioned plan and adjust along the way. We will also, be able to reflect the communities that we want to serve, the communities where we are, trying to attract talent, and also trying to sort of connect the work that we're engaged in. So
Great.
Yeah, and I think the leadership is key in kind of embedding the goals among your leadership team and throughout your organizations, right? So you get leaders within your organization to model behavior or at least encourage behavior that's participation in D&I efforts. At AT&T, we had a very organic employee engagement campaign that came about that we call Believe Chicago. And it spurred other Believe campaigns in over 20 cities across the country. But this particular effort started organically in Chicago, and we had an employee that went to work for the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, as his chief of staff, came back to AT&T and wanted to address the problem of gun violence in Chicago neighborhoods. When she took the idea of taking AT&T personnel and resources into some neighborhoods that were impacted by gun violence, she got to sit down with our CEO, John Donovan, and his only comment back to her was, "You're not thinking nearly big enough." And as we rolled out this program and started to really lean in 19 impacted neighborhoods in the south and west sides of Chicago, we had John Donovan came to one of the garages located in that neighborhood. And when he was asked, "How long is this program going to last?" he indicated, "The rest of my life." And it was just that type of commitment to embed these type of programs into what we do, into our day-to-day operations. That's the model behavior that I think we can get to and other companies can get to as well.
And what you're really talking about is something that we alluded to on the panel as well, which is community impact. And the critical to this success is not just what we do inside of our organizations, but what we do in the communities in which we live. Right. And that the workplace is often compliant space, and it's often space that is more integrated than the space that you live in back at home. And so we have a really unique opportunity to get this right. And in the workplaces, the folks who are really dedicated to this kind of work are doing things that many organizations outside of the workplace aren't doing at all. So it's a great opportunity to lead, just as you say. We also we hit on the importance of a learning and development strategy, of a designated sort of leader, of strategic leader, which is a CDO that is resourced. Right. That came out of the audience. They said, you can have a CDO, but if you don't give them resources or power, agency, it's not going to help.
And one thing that I really loved about the panel was when there's so much that happens in the D&I space that happens with $0,
That's true.
zero funding, and call it out. When you've achieved something amazing and you had no budget, point that out.
Yes, yeah.
And that was a real big takeaway for me, because I have never done that, and I should be doing that.
And tell the stories. I think if people react to stories, right? So when you have a story, whether it's a great impact of an event and you used less resources all the way to a leader being able to get up there, and as much as I love the idea of there being designated, resourced leaders for this work, it's even more impactful when somebody who's not in that
Yes.
part of the work is doing it.
So
So when
true.
you get somebody getting out there telling a diversity story or an experience that they had or a change that they engaged in themselves, and they're not
Yeah.
on the DNI team,
Yeah.
it's like an extra
Right.
win for everyone because now
Absolutely.
they are going to be able to sort of model for somebody else, and then somebody else begins to say like, oh, I want to talk about that, or
Right.
did you believe that's vulnerable, and that's not the most. We talk about disrupting business and innovating. Talk about being innovative in this
Yep.
space, right?
Yep.
Like that's a way to get people connected on a level that you can't monetize directly, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if we think about, if we have a strategy, we have the leadership, we have the resources, everything's, going well, how do we measure success? What are the metrics? What are the high level, or low level, whatever, if you want to get granular, but like what are the most important metrics that we're really looking at?
I think you have to look at the data, right? So, I mean, I think you want to still, even though we want to get past things like representation, I do think you need to pay attention to where folks are showing up throughout the levels in the organization. I think you do want to be aware of turnover, development opportunities, advancement, certainly recruitment and retention, and think about it that way, and then just not stop there. So then think about who's getting high
Right.
profile or high visibility opportunities within the organization, and what are the things that we're doing when we think about that whole. There's a great conversation around equity and equality and justice. How do you bring people an opportunity that they typically haven't had access to,
right.
And that might even take a little bit of extra time, and it's not to take away from others, but it's really to allow people to get into a space and a place that they haven't traditionally been. And so being able to provide resources or people or some combination of that to get them comfortable and hopefully successful, right? Because what you don't want to do is create a great organization and an environment and then have folks leaving if they're not feeling like they're getting
That's
the
right.
right support in the organization.
And if you're not getting the diverse talent that you covet or that you desire for a specific type of skill set, think about that and do something about it, right? That could be an opportunity for your organization to invest in maybe a local nonprofit that's cultivating the women engineers or the girls who code, that type of opportunity where, if it's not here today, that skill set that you're looking for from that diverse candidate, you can do something about it being there tomorrow.
So if everything is in place, like you have your leadership, you have your resources, you have a strategy, everything that we've been talking about, how do you measure success? How do you know that your efforts are working?
I think it's really important. I think one of the things that we want to do is you don't want to lose sight of the data, right? So you do need to sort of look at where are you as an organization? How is the representation looking? Not just in terms of who you're bringing in, who has advancement opportunities, who's getting developed, who's getting the high visibility projects,
Yes.
who's leaving potentially the organization. So I think you do want to use that as one signal of health. I think in addition to that, then you start looking at, are you seeing practices changing, right? Are you finding people talking about things that maybe they hadn't talked about? Are you building in resources and processes for folks who maybe haven't had access to some of those systems in the past? And are you thinking about ways to do things differently? And for me, that would be an opportunity. Are you, even engaging in, we talked about telling stories, right? Even engaging in those conversations. How often are people doing that? And are they doing it without you nudging them, right?
Right.
Without you having to sort of say, hey, can you do this for us?
Yeah.
Versus they are building it in. They're having their quarterly meetings, they're talking about it. I think those would be some of the ways that I would be measuring it. We have goals in place by business unit. We're trying to get folks to do things differently. So you do have to continue to do some of that measuring, and then you're going to add some of the qualitative items, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if you're having trouble finding your diverse candidates, maybe there's an opportunity for you to do something about that, right? So, if you're looking for a very technical position and you'd really like to fill it with a diverse candidate, but you're not finding those candidates, maybe it's time for you to lean in on with an organization that's cultivating that type of talent, right? Get with the girls that code. Get with some not-for-profits, so the next time that those opportunities come around, you're better prepared. And when we talk about metrics in general, I do think it's important just to understand where you are and where you're going. And you can keep it simple. Start with volunteer hours, right? Have some targets, general targets for volunteer hours. But metrics are a way to tell your story, right? And make sure that the efforts that you're putting forth are a good use of everyone's time. Right, so at AT&T we have our ERG Hacemos that I'm very involved in, and we have a day called High Technology Day, where we bring in students for a career day with a focus on STEM and day of workshops. And we do a survey at the end of the day, and you bet that when we go for funding for this or to get sponsors, when we can tell people that 80% of the people that attended say they're more likely to gravitate toward a career in technology after our workshop day, well, that's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
And again, that's something more solid than just come support our effort.
And that's in addition to the ones that, I think are pretty common, like, retention and attrition and representation,
That's
for
right.
sure. And then when you disaggregate those metrics by race, seeing where there might be gaps and where you can jump in and close them.
That's right. Seeing where your
I
opportunities
think
are.
informing people too, because one of the things that you'll sometimes still hear is folks might feel we're further along than we are.
That's right.
And so being really honest about when those gaps or where those gaps are hitting in an organization, and because it's possible that folks don't really know.
Right.
And when you think that there's that talent that's unattainable, again, think about it differently. How can we get to that talent in a different way? Maybe we need to shift the way, does everybody need these particular requirements? Do we have to go after the same program, the same places that we've always...
There could be one qualifier that's eliminating you from a whole talent pool.
Indeed, yeah,
Absolutely.
And you can leverage research to tell you that certain folks may take longer to apply for a job. Certain folks may have different things. The way that they just look at a job description might impact their desire and
That's
willingness to apply right away. So
That's right. And there was a question about benchmarks, which, I think there are different kinds of benchmarks, but the one that we recommended or that we said people should look into was the GDIB, which is the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmark, which is can be applied to any industry. So that was just something.
that was new.
Yeah.
That was new to me.
that was a nice remark.
So any last words? And when you think about why this is important, why we should everyone, not just chief diversity officers, not just, women and underrepresented racialized minorities, but everybody. Why is this important and why should we care?
I'll just say that we're in a very competitive environment, and most businesses that we're in compete with a lot of different businesses. There's a lot of choices out there, and we're in a day and age where people are your differentiator. And you're really trying to maximize everything you can out of your workforce. And we know that diversity, by promoting diversity, you're going to get that more engaged workforce. You're going to get those those improved business results. There's been a lot of studies that showcase that diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams. And really, if you're really trying to lead and excel and be that differentiator, you need diversity as a practice throughout your organization.
I keep coming back to, we know it's the right thing to do, right? And we know that this is really important work, and we live in complicated, challenging, and exciting times. And for us to be able to recognize that by valuing the complexity of all of us, and we all have complexity, and our identities and the experiences that we've had, and all of the different dimensions of diversity that we bring are really meaningful. And when you can create an organization where folks feel comfortable, they're not spending time, hiding that or having to sort of get away from that. They're spending time innovating and connecting with each other and really doing great work. They're serving the communities where you're trying to sort of connect deeper as well. And I think all of those pieces really add to important sort of contributions to our world at large.
think that's a good last word.
Let's impact our world.
Absolutely.
Works for me. Sign me up.
Drop the mic.
Yeah.
That was great.
Boom.
Thank you.
Goodbye. We're out.